Jesus said he came to serve, not to be served. He paints a vivid picture of what that looks like in the Gospel of John when he seeks out to wash his disciples' feet, realizing he has called us to be servants as well. He's not called us to wash people's feet necessarily. It's a cultural thing. Back in that day, people walked around on dusty roads wearing sandals. They needed their feet washed. He calls us to be servants. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope this message will be helpful. I'm going to read the scriptures as I do the sermon today, if that's okay. In John 13, we're talking about real servants. It was just before the Passover feast, so we know when that is, right? Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. This is the word of God for us, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
My first point today is we're talking about service and servants. I'm convinced that one of the biggest problems people have in our culture today is by being focused in on what they want and what they need. And when we begin to do that, what happens is our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. When we begin to focus in on helping other people and serving other people, our world gets larger and larger and larger. And if a person who wants to be miserable, focus on themselves. I just think that's really poor judgment to do that. And I've seen it in my life if I start focusing on me, it doesn't take too long, I get disappointed. But when I focus in on other people and helping them, I find joy. Now, with all due respect to your political leanings, Ronald Reagan is a hero of mine. And he made the statement that it's amazing what can be done if you don't care who gets the credit. That's a true statement. But first of all, servants, number one, they love. Now let me offer this. As much as it's like us being childlike. Now, I have seen children for years. I've heard from parents for years. And one of the common things I hear from parents sometimes is this: my child just will not take a nap. Of course, when they get to our age, you want a nap. But as a child, my child won't take a nap. I said, well, tell me about it. My son or my daughter will play all day long, and then they'll collapse in the middle of the floor. And I'll find Johnny or Susie under the dining room table asleep. And I said, that's perfect. What happens often is when we love what we do, we don't get tired of doing it. All kinds of energy kind of gets into our system when we're enjoying and loving what we do, to the extent that we don't even feel fatigued. Isn't that true? Now, an example of that would be, and I think this is great for our church, I bragged on us downstairs this morning about how we have a church full of people who love to serve. Now, I think that's incredible. I think it's great. And what I think happens in churches out there is that we don't understand sometimes that not everybody is motivated the way we're motivated. Not everybody's motivated this way. An example would be, and I'm talking about in a global sense, not Horns Church, but in a global sense, churches and nonprofits are made up of two kinds of people. 80% of the people in the church are motivated by love. 20% are more motivated by duty and honor. They feel a sense of I must, I should, I ought. That's actually how a lot of the 20% people, we all know the 80-20 rule about churches and nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, 20% of the people are motivated by duty and honor. Doesn't necessarily say they don't love, but they're motivated differently than the 80%. And sometimes the 20% gets really frustrated because they can't find volunteers from the 80%. Is that true? Well, why is that? And I think in part it's because we don't understand how to motivate people out of love. when I find myself frustrated with trying to get volunteers, I'm the problem. Because I'm not touching the right heart chord to have somebody step up and volunteer. But when we love what we do, we'll never tire of it. Jesus says we should love one another, obviously, and this event occurs at the Passover. It says, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love, and he's getting ready to show them that by how he serves. Well, servants are, secondly, they're strong. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. When I just touched on this with my previous point, but the fact of the matter is, as we are serving, we find energy. An example. I know this has happened. It's happened since I've been here. It's happened many times before, and it'll happen many times later. Somebody gets a phone call. Such and such a person has lost a family member. Right? How often does that happen? A lot, right? Especially this past year, it's happened a lot. Well, that person that gets that phone call all of a sudden forgets their own fatigue level. And they get on the phone and they start calling, and not just our church, every church, this happens. They start calling people to step up. We need to get some food. It's interesting to me. One of the first things that happens is we need to get paper plates and stuff. I've laughed all my life, all my career about that, because we want paper plates and cups over there first, and then we go get the food. That's just standard. I'm not criticizing it. I think it's just the way it is. But they start making phone calls, and everybody they call has been busy and are about to drop. They're so tired. They've had a hard week. They've worked hard. But guess what happens? The opportunity to serve re-energizes that person, and they start doing what they do, and they don't even notice they're tired. Is that not true? That is totally true. And so what happens is people who serve typically have more energy than those who want to be served. And I don't want to camp out on this too long, but every church has those who give and those who take. Every nonprofit has people who give and people who take. My experience has been the givers are the people filled with joy. Well, my next point here is servants serve imperfect people. Woo. John says, so he got up from the meal, he took off his outer clothing, he wrapped a towel around his waist, and after he poured water in a basin, he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, this is a rhetorical statement. This is not really a question. He's asking something that he thinks he knows the answer to. You're going to wash my feet? Peter's kind of saying, are you kidding me? You're going to wash my feet? No. That's borne out in the next verse. He said, you're going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing. But later you will understand. No, said Peter. You're never going to wash my feet. Now, why would Peter say that? Peter would say that because he still doesn't get it. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't have eternal life. It doesn't mean he doesn't understand who Jesus is. He does not. Back in the Old Testament version of Jesus was not a lamb to be slaughtered. The Old Testament version of Jesus was, in their minds, in the minds of the people at least, they did not understand the concept of the suffering servant. What they had, the concept they grabbed onto and held on for dear life, was a conquering hero. They did not understand that time that when Jesus is here and he's going to leave, they didn't understand that gap of time between Jesus being here on earth physically and when he would come for his kingdom. They didn't understand that. And I would say, how could they? We understand progressive revelation. We know more and more as time processes, if you will. I mean, how much did the children of Israel know when they were in slavery in Egypt? They knew very little, but they knew about the gospel. We know that because what we find in the book of Hebrews is that Moses decided to endure the reproaches of being called being called Messiah's son rather than being called Pharaoh's child. Moses understood about Messiah. And he was willing to align himself with Messiah and bear the reproaches of that in Pharaoh's house. Back to this, imperfect people. Wow. Peter is definitely imperfect. Is that true? He is so emotionally, what a character. He wants to pull out his sword and fight, but he won't pray. Think about that. How true is that of us today? We're ready to take on the world, but we sometimes aren't willing to take 10 minutes out and pray. That's my story. But the point is, we're called to serve imperfect people, and Peter is an example of an imperfect person. And Jesus said this way, you do not realize what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. And Peter fires back, no. You're never going to wash my feet. And then Jesus answers, unless I wash your feet, you have no part with me. And I think what he's saying here is, if you want to be my disciple, if you want to be a follower of mine, I got to wash your feet. This is a wonderful metaphor. The image he's painting here is of pure service. And Peter, he's going, wait a minute. Here's the King of Kings and the Lord of Glory. And he's telling us, again, he said it before, I did not come to be served, I came to serve. And that's the story of Jesus all through his career, his life on earth. And Peter still doesn't get that. And it goes back to his lack of understanding of the Old Testament, I think, at least in part. Unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, don't just wash my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well. That sounds exactly like Peter. Servants serve imperfect people. Wow. Now think about the imperfect people we come in contact on a regular basis who need to be served. I mean, it's a big deal, is it not? One of my favorite persons in this world today, I must admit, is Dave Ramsey. I listen to him every Monday night on 106.1. I do it because I'm headed out to do my show on Monday nights, and it's convenient, and I like hearing what he says. When somebody asks him how he's doing, he'll say religiously, better than I deserve. And that is a great answer. Because he understands how imperfect he is. You understand how imperfect I am. But it's important to recognize that God calls us to serve imperfect people. Now, I think at some level, I might have a gift of some kind that says forgiveness. Being able to forgive people. I preached a sermon one time many years ago, and hay fever has me today, by the way. Many years ago, and the church was relatively full. We were doing a baptism, and the baptism was for this guy's niece. And in the sermon, I preached a similar passage. I was preaching specifically about forgiveness. And you know how playful I can get. In the sermon, I went, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. He knows where I am. If he wants to talk, he can come find me. After the service, that guy hung around. And he said, you were preaching to me today. I said, tell me about it. I have not had a conversation with my son in 10 years. We got upset about something 10 years ago. We haven't spoken in 10 years. And I said, well, how's that working for you? He said, it's not. I'm miserable. I said, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. What should I do about it? I said, I'd get on the phone and call him, and if he doesn't take my call, I'd leave a message saying, hey, I just want to reach out to you and let you know I love you. Wow. He did that, and in time they mended their relationship. My friend lived 15, maybe more years. With all due respect to my NC State fans, this guy was a big guy. He played football for Clemson. Ouch. He humbled himself, reached out to his own son, restored the relationship, and they had 10, 15 years of time together before he passed away. Servants also aren't showy. A servant will show up and help out and not ask for a lot of credit. Jesus answered, a person who has had a bath needs only wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you're clean, though not every one of you. For he knew he was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put the clothes on and returned to his place. Do you understand what I'm about to do, or what I've done to you? He asked them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so. That is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. This scene that's happening right before Passover, right before Jesus is going to be led down the street and killed. He is, just with his disciples, very humbly, doing the right thing, giving them the right lesson, and not putting it up in lights in front of the highway somewhere. Being very discreet, very, very low key. And I think it's important to realize that some of us have greater recognition needs than others. That's fair. But it's important to realize what is important is we serve, and we really don't care who gets the credit. That's the important thing. Well, my last point is servants meet needs. I've set an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a master greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. It's important to realize that what Jesus is saying here is, I've given you an example. I've demonstrated for you how to live your life. I've demonstrated for you the fact that if you want meaning and significance in your life in this lifetime, go serve. How powerful is that lesson? Servants meet needs. Now, it's also very challenging in our culture today to help determine what needs are. I don't know that if somebody came to our church wanting $1,200 for a new iPhone, if we would help them with that. But it's important to realize that needs need to be met where they occur. And sometimes the people we're going to meet their needs for, you can't really see how they're living their lives. Speaking of Dave Ramsey, I'll tell you, I've had multimillionaires in my churches. I had a multimillionaire in my church, and he was having a real hard time making his mortgage payment because he was so extended. I think it's important to realize that meeting needs, we don't understand how that looks sometimes. I don't understand how it looks sometimes. It may mean a kind word to somebody. It may mean giving them water, giving them food. It may mean, who knows what it means. But the fact of the matter is, God calls us to stand out there and demonstrate His love through us by meeting needs of people that sometimes we don't even like. Sometimes people that aren't like us. And that's a tough thing, is it not? Don't we find ourselves pulling back sometimes from people that aren't like us? Sure we do. In today's world, that is being like us is getting more and more hard to define. Our multicultural world around us might call us to meet needs in ways that we have no concept, no imagination about how that might look. Thank you for tuning in to Horns Methodist Church today. If this message has been helpful, feel free to give us a call at 252-237-4616. We'd be glad to talk with you about this or anything else related to your spiritual journey. God bless you and have a great week.